Good evening, all panelists. We're moving on to a very interesting segment now, and the topic is Toys Make a Nation. And interestingly, we have an all-women panel, so it would be wonderful to see how we're going to, discuss how toys are about to make this nation. It's my pleasure to invite Professor Anubha Kakru, who will be the moderator of the session. She's a professor and director, School of Design, Anand National University. She's done an MArch in Industrial Design, School of Planning and Architecture, Delhi. She's pursued her undergraduate and postgraduate studies in industrial design, again from SPA, New Delhi, and has received training in design management from the School of Engineering and Design, Brunei University, London. She introduced several pedagogical innovative practices, led research and consultancy initiatives in the various organizations where she's worked. And Professor Kakru has been affiliated with organizations such as Future Brands, British Council, and also has run her own design consultancy practice. Currently, she's professor and director at the School of Design at Anand National University. We also have Anisha Shekhar Mukherjee, who's an architect who has had a consuming interest in books ever since she was gifted a Motley set on her 6th birthday. Interesting. She works selectively as a conservation consultant, architectural historian, and an independent designer and researcher and author. Anisha believes that history is as much to do with the present as the past and seeks to address interrelated issues of design, history, and education through her blog. The other person on the panel is Shaguna Gehlot, who is a performance oral storyteller and an educationist, education, peace, and culture specialist. Wow. She began storytelling with Tell Tales to her newborn nephew Raghavendra, but now performs regularly on stage. Shaguna studied at the University of Bristol, UK as a Commonwealth scholar, and after her stint in the UK, she has followed her heart back to India with communities and has since been actively working on conserving rare and dying folk art forms and the art of storytelling. She has worked with organizations like INPAC, UNESCO, and British Council. We also have Shraddha Jain with us on the panel, who has studied Bachelor of Fine Arts, specializing in printmaking from Government College of Art, Chandigarh, and further pursued her post-graduation in film and video communication design from National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad. Her interest lies in studying and reviving the culture of playing tabletop board games from around the world and creative active play community. She's interested in exploring the politics of play and creating meaningful public spaces. She's also the founder of Studio Clockworks and has facilitated and conducted game workshops for schools, colleges, and independent organizations across the country. Under her studio capacity, she's working on a worker placement game about the coffee cultivars and a resource management game on waste segregation. She's also instrumental in building an active game group in collaboration with a local community space called Project Otenga in Ahmedabad and Lahi Lahi in Bangalore. I hope I got that right. Welcome all. Welcome, Professor Anubha, and it's your show from here on.
Thank you, Professor Vasu. Thank you for that very kind introduction. And I know it sort of kind of went on. So, but thanks a lot. We seem to like ourselves a lot. But that said, let me, on an informal note, welcome Anisha, Shaguna, and Shraddha. Thank you for being here today at a relatively short notice. So, without much ado, let me just lay out the topics for the day, which is Toys Make a Nation. And the thought came to me quite some time back when I was looking at all the kind of content that is on social media and also on television for children to consume. Most of us comes to us now from foreign shores, and sometimes it's quite contextual in the sense that, you know, if you look at content like Doraemon or Shinchan or even some others, they're not really relevant to an Indian context, but that's what our children are consuming. So that made me thinking that, and also if you look at the toys that they have, like, so the Barbie kitchen has an oven, and how many Indian homes really have ovens, in which we cook. So that's what made me thinking that, what are the things that our children are playing with, and how is that relating to their own identity building. So that was where the thought for this panel comes from, that toys or play or games or whatever, what have you, is what makes the character of a young person as he or she is growing up. And eventually, that character that has been formed through their various activities in their childhood is probably what also relates to their identity as they grow up, whether that's cultural identity or regional or even national identity. So that was the premise for this panel. And so today I was very lucky to have with me, as Taruna already introduced, Anisha, who's been thinking and writing about the Indian notion of design and also the whole notion of Indian identity in design, as well as Shaguna, who's taken it upon herself to make storytelling something which is approachable to children again, which used to be quite common when we were younger with our grandparents, but it's a dying art now. So Shaguna also runs a very interesting festival called Gumakkar Narayan. And then, of course, Shraddha, who's actually, out of all of us, the only bona fide toy designer, if I may say so. So she actually works in the domain at a professional level as well, and used to run and still runs a studio called Clockwork, and is now also teaching. So over to you, ladies. So Shaguna, since you're the storyteller, may I invite you first and foremost for your views, so that you can, set the set the tale, and and therein lies a tale. So Shaguna, over to you.
Right. So, since you've talked about storytelling, I'd like to start with a story. And, there was once upon a time, old lady, by the name of Shanti Devi. And Shanti Devi was a very old woman who would wear a little bit of sindoor, and she would work in the house from morning till night. And she never had a time to just sit down and hang her boots and just have some kind of chai or chach. But that's what Shanti Devi was really like. And with her, she had her old husband, and his name was Makhan Singh. And Makhan Singh used to dress up in a dhoti and wear his kurta and wear a turban over his head and go to his farm to work there. I mean, he was never educated, so had nothing to do with books. And all in his free time he could do was maybe have a hookah, which he would, in the evening spend time sitting on a cot with his friends, just have. So that was the life of Shanti Devi and her husband, Makhan Singh, in a very distant village in Uttar Pradesh. In the evenings, when their families would gather for some festivals like Christmas, there would be some people who would come and play the piano which they had in the cottage. And the piano sounded something like this. The piano was just so smooth, and only one person could sit there and really play it, and the whole village would hear it when it would play. But that's how it was. And sometimes there would be some greyhounds that would be in the background and make some noise, but nothing else really that would keep the village going. So that was a story, and I could go on with that. The only problem is the dichotomy of that story. When you talk about Makhan Singh, and when you go around back to your village, to your grandparents, you see no Makhan Singh with wearing a turban. I mean, he is wearing a turban or not, depending on what book have you been reading. And that's exactly what we have been challenged with in children's literature as well. What you read and what you see is so different. And whether it is the toys you're playing, whether it's the oven that the Barbie doll is using, when you go back home, it is so different. When you see it around, it's just not your family. If you're studying in an education which is, an English medium education, and you've got books from, writers abroad, you put on a lot of time trying to understand what is the breakfast that they're having. It's a proper full English breakfast. And back home, you get only aloo parathas maybe, or aloo poha for breakfast. So if you have to pass an exam, you have to remember. So when Jack came for dinner, he had turkey, and he probably had some orange sauce with it, and you could not relate with it whatsoever. So it's a challenge whether you're educating yourself or you're just playing yourself or entertaining, but it's very disconnected. And I think that's where this panel is important, what you're discussing, that even the simplest of toys give you so much of a background in your heritage, whether it's your acceptance or whether you're trying to, just be at ease with it. You can't always be kind of trying to learn something new. And you have to, of course, I mean, because it's become so international that what you see on television, you go out to either, for your work, for your studies as well. So you do need to have that window where you do know what's happening abroad. But at the same time, you still need to know what's your culture. And that just makes you more at ease and also probably takes you stronger and further. I mean, I've got these two other instruments. These are just whistles. This one is from Russia. So this one has a Marushka doll on it. And this one is a very traditional one. So this has a mouse. So we all have very similar cultures, what we've been using. It's just that probably how we see it is just different. So if we could just probably merge it there and have a combination of what's happening in other cultures, be it Japan, which is very, very, still very strong with its cultural roots, or something like America, which a lot of people like to hate and talk about as well. So I think that's my views to open with, and then probably we'll take it further.
Thank you. Thank you, Shaguna, for that very, very evocative illustration of the point that, yes, I mean, you had me when you spoke of Christmas and the piano. But yes, that drives home the point that we are talking about these things, especially, as you said, in English medium schools, with our children not really knowing what it is that we are talking of. So with that, we'll come back to that. But with that, let's go on to Shraddha. And Shraddha, all yours.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to share the screen. Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me on this panel with a topic which is really close to my heart. The reason I got into game design, and more importantly, to build a game culture, which is still something that is left when we are in 9th grade or when we are still teenagers, we are asked not to play anymore. So taking my lead from there, over the years, I studied filmmaking and printmaking, but since I was traveling to many different places in the country on research projects, my eyes and ears were always open. And because of that, a lot of indigenous games came into picture. For me, documentation became the real asset and tool with which I led. So there's a very famous quote that goes by, children learn as they play, but most importantly, in play, they learn how to learn, which always I replace the word children and they with we. We learn as we play, and most importantly, in play, we learn how to learn. So when I take this upon myself, I am also telling that we don't, when do we stop becoming children? When do we stop having the curiosity? And when do we stop having that courage? So leading with those guiding keywords, what led me to my journey on exploring the entire game culture, which I was familiar with, I was made to forget about it. And then again, I picked it up at the age of 25 when I was done with my postgrad, and I was like, what do I do next? I wanted to play. So curiosity is what led me to this whole world of like finding what I did not know, or what is it that I knew in bits and pieces, but I wanted to join those dots again. So it has been an important part of me picking my path. And it took me some bit of courage as well to make a fool of myself many a times, to just play when nobody else was doing that. When people were getting into gadgets, I would pick a piece of chalk and get to the chai gate at NID and get other people to talk to me or like play games. So moving on to this image that I took in Mizoram during a research project was these two young men selling SIM cards and finding time to play English draughts while they were selling coffee or having their coffee break, basically. So these kind of small instances of people playing Ludo outside post office, people playing chess and draughts outside during their break time, children playing Brain Vita, which I remember getting as return gifts when I was really young. These kind of came back with the flood of memories. And it told me how important a foundation these things laid in my own life, that I have again picked up that thread. So starting with my own family, things had to seep in, and this is where I found my family members also participating many a times to be curious and just spend some quality time. Here we are in Ahmedabad playing a grid game called Kirkat, which is one of my favorite games. It's just a piece of chalk and a couple of carom coins or probably pebbles that we pick up, and we can instruct this game in less than a minute, and children are all over, like they can play it in their own possible manners. So all of these journeys have led me to question and have a solution for it by creating opportunities. If these inclusive spaces did not exist, what have I done, or what can Studio Clockwork do to bring these traditional games back on surface? So this questioning led to, why is there an age bias? Why are there generational gaps? Like, why can't a game like Tangram be played by both young and old? What kind of equipment? Are we so dependent on equipment that we cannot have our own freedom in terms of being creative? Play pieces, the sharpeners, if you see here, if you can look closely, this is a simple snakes and ladder made, and children are playing with sharpeners and erasers as the play pieces. And we were trying to incorporate counting as one of the things with special custom made dice over here. So just picking up from the familiarity that we have in the culture that we have followed for so long, and what more can we build upon it? Since literacy, numeracy is something that does seep into a lot of games these days, I am of the opinion that it can be there, but there can be a marriage between the two things. Children learning basic skills versus literacy and numeracy following much later. So creating opportunities by conducting a lot of workshops for parents and children, where I would introduce them to traditional games. So the more you teach, the better you learn. And this is something that I wanted to follow all throughout. Displaying ourselves out there, putting your work out there in public spaces, participating in maker fairs, and getting to interact with people, getting that hesitation out, which also helps bridge the gap and break that ice where people also start questioning. And there are things that are hovering in everyone's head, but we have not really encountered it till we come across a space which actually talks about analog games more so. Finding joy in sharing. So just a couple of words that I've peppered around because I've played with different generations, and it's so much fun to see how people engage with different generations, and they're curious to learn something as simple as shapes and color kind of a matching thing, or Connect Four, or games from other cultures as well. But most importantly, what I have felt is to create spaces which are not intimidating, where you help the other person to come on board much faster and easier by introducing small snippets of what games are, what play is, giving that experience, passing on that experience, and an experience that goes on from one age to the other age to the next generation. So early year learning versus young children playing versus young adults versus adults. So there's a lot of connection and how these building blocks kind of come into action. Language has not been a barrier when I have traveled, when I've carried small pocket-sized games. There's always a creative way to overcome that. So culturally rooted toys, when I got this topic, I was also thinking about sustainability. And when we are talking about culturally rooted toys, how do we engage with the material? What kind of context are we working in? And what is the need that gives rise to these situations where we want to introduce these games into culture, which obviously adds to your numeracy or literacy, but more so to an experience which is so playful that will go on for your life. So this is a bamboo bankala which was made at National Bamboo Development Association in Dimapur back in 2011. And this allows for more experimentation and collaboration between different stakeholders when we are open to understanding local indigenous material rather than bringing in more new or alien materials to a region, baking by hand. First and foremost, I am somebody who loves to tinker with hands, so there's almost every day something or the other going on. Getting people to participate, recreate, replicate, and take ownership of what they are making. So more than handing over toys, it's also encouraged for teachers to have a training where they know these tools, where they can encourage children to participate and take ownership of things that they create. These are simple pebbles that we pick up along our walk when I go to the mountain communities to engage in creative workshops. So co-creation being one of the primary ways where I go and see what can be done in the local space. Upcycling is another area of my interest. And as I already mentioned, designing meaningful toys that focus beyond literacy and numeracy. This is a game which was based on phonics, where children would have to identify the opposites by reading out or identifying symbols, leg and an egg, cat and a bat, etc. So more visual communication happening here, pattern recognition. A group of men playing Chinese checker, a really old worn board which caught my attention in Mizoram. So I'm almost towards the close of my talk, and this is my grandfather who's almost 85, and this is my niece and nephew playing tangrams. So age having no barrier, no bias whatsoever. So finding games that can reduce the generational gap, where one can pick up common links that can tie things together. So this brings me to my last slide of the area that I'm currently exploring is digital board games. So while this last year has made it difficult for people to get around a physical space and engage in social gaming, digital board games is something that I've been exploring. And storytelling. This game called Jaipur is something that is based on economics. How do you trade goods? What kind of barter do you deal in? And in the digital version of the same, we had these little notes where you were made part as a protagonist, where you would come across these different characters along the game, which was very personalized. And a map would slowly reveal as in how you're traveling, how many camels you're spending to go, or how much rupees are you spending. So storytelling through games can teach skills applicable in real world scenarios. And I'm really looking forward to a lot of games based on Indian tradition, Indian themes, which the children and adults alike can relate to and take some real world learning from the same. So this brings me to the end of my slideshow. And thank you so much for listening to me talk about my thoughts and views. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shraddha. So not wasting any more time, finally over to Anisha. Anisha, would you like me to present your slides?
Yes, thank you, Anubha. I'll just begin and then I'll ask you to bring them on when I need.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So thank you. It was very interesting listening to everybody. And I'm also going to start with a story which is based on an actual incident. So about 10 years ago, the children in my daughter's class were asked to bring along their favorite toy for a show and tell session. And of approximately 40 children in the class, all but one of the girls got a Barbie doll to show, and all but one of the boys got a Beyblade. And when I came to know about this, quite frankly, I was appalled for two reasons. The first was that, at an age of 6 or 7, when children are supposed to have very individual personalities, the fact that they had such uniform likes was something that was very worrying. And the second was that what they seemed to favor was, it seemed to me, both alien and artificial, both in the kind of sort of, in the appearance of the toys as well as in the material that they were using. And that basically got me, it stayed in my mind. And now if I leapfrog to my students in the postgraduate department of industrial design at SPA Delhi, where I've been teaching research methodologies for the past 15 years. And what I find, what I observe there as well, is that many of them are very bright, but nonetheless, they very often think in very uniform, standardized ways, right, which are unable to sort of challenge the conventional mainstream methods of doing things. And therefore, they are very often, they miss the obvious solution to address a problem. So now, how's this all related to making a nation? I'm not going to talk about the etymological origin of the word nation or the historical development of nationalism, because those are very complex and contentious issues and would require a different panel discussion altogether. But to clarify what I think about when I say making a nation, is I suppose it's a notion of a collective identity which can contribute both to personal development and to the society or the country or the region that you inhabit. So there are qualities of collaboration and personal and larger development that I see when I think of making a nation, of the word making a nation. So if you have toys like, let's say, the Barbie toy or the Beyblade, all toys to some extent will help you, develop some amount of motor skills or cognition. And that's a given, more or less, it depends on the kind of toy. But I think beyond that, the toys have these implicit and explicit values that they transmit. And by values, I mean both ethics and aesthetics. And so in sort of kind of provoking my postgraduate students to respond to their context, because very often they would seemingly be unaware of the real conditions of the world that we inhabit. So I've been thinking about whether we had a notion of Indian identity pre sort of the struggle for independence from the British, because that's the conventional explanation that we only got united once we had to confront the British. And in doing so, I discovered that there are certain characteristics, there are certain lakshans, which are seen, which are observed through much of our history, through all facets of life. And they affect whatever we do, including what we make, and obviously the kind of toys also that we play with. And so I've got some slides, and if I can request Anubha to show them. And again, I contrast this. So my basic, I think, premise is that when you're talking about toys making a nation, I think how the toys are made is fundamental to what they transmit. So in the case of, let's say, the Barbie or the Beyblade, if you are making things, if you're manufacturing things in a standardized, uniform way, then I think it is implicit that the kind of products that will be produced will also be standardized and uniform, and therefore kind of thinking that they provoke or don't will also be similar. Now, so therefore, what's the alternative? And to me, the alternative is in both in terms of production as well as in terms of process, is there in craft. So these are some toys. This is the Gyan Chopper. This is from the 19th century, and it's from Rajasthan, and this is part of an exhibition called The Body in Indian Art at the National Museum. And this is the precursor for our modern day snakes and ladders. And here, obviously, the notion of ethics and values is very overt. So this is initially used in the Jain system for transmitting values, and there are Hindu, Muslim, various sort of Gyan choppers in various forms. But apart from such overt sort of transmission of values, let's go on and see the other examples that I have. So if you could put on the next one. Yes, so these are some owls in terracotta brought from Calcutta about 10 years ago from the person who made them on the streets of Calcutta. And the next one, please, thank you. This is a wooden handcrafted parrot from Benares, and I think a number of us may have seen this. So you rotate the sphere at the end, and the beak and the tail of the parrot moves up and down, and it's again a favorite toy. And these are some clay dolls and toys crafted by Mahesh Murtikar from Lucknow. So while these are all very different, and I think what comes through at once is the fact that they all have a certain identity which stems from wherever they are made. But there are some underlying characteristics, some underlying lakshanas that I can see in them, which are like principles which seem to unite them in a certain way. And so 2 or 3 of them I'll just point out. The foremost of them, I think, is frugality. And when I say frugality, I mean both how materials are used, how they are made, what kind of materials are used. So you can see that generally they're local materials. They are used in an individual way. They're not the product of a large scale mechanization. And they're optimized. That's one. The other thing is that the idea of frugality being equal to beauty. So if we can go back and just refresh our memories, all of them I find personally are, I find them quite beautiful, and I think they could pass for objects of art as well. The second attribute that I think distinguishes them, the second lakshana, is that of improvisation. So if we can go to the, I'll use the owls slide to just explain this further. So if we can go back to the, yes. Now these are all, if you look at them, they're all recognizably owls, but they're all very different. And therefore, they give, I think, a scope for individual creativity and interpretation, both to the maker as well as to the user. So they give you that latitude. There is no uniformity about them. And the last attribute, I think, is a sense of responsible contribution. So they all use materials very optimally. All these that I've shown you use natural materials. They are fairly small in terms of their proportions. These are about 3 to 4 inches. You can't really get a sense of scale from this. And all these, I think these concepts of frugality, of responsible contribution, of improvisation and creative interpretation, both for the maker and the user, are inherent in making anything, whether it's an individual or a society that they inhabit or a nation. So, and I think, in the times of the pandemic, this has become very, very clear to us that how we make something affects whatever we make. So how we make a nation, I think, is intrinsic in the process in which we make something, whether it's toys or anything else. So toys are just a reflection of the way we live. And I think if we want to address any lacuna in the way we live, then it's all a combined thing. So the toys are a reflection of what we want. And I like to end there with a quotation, Ananda Kumaraswamy. So no, that's just that slide sort of explains the Gyan Chopper, but I've done that. So I'm going to read out, and this is from my book on attributing design identity. And please keep in mind that this observation dates to 1910. So it's about 111 years ago. And I'm quoting now. It is the weakness of our national movement that we do not love India. We love suburban England. We love the comfortable bourgeois prosperity that is to be someday established when we have learned enough science and forgotten enough art to successfully compete with Europe in a commercial war conducted on its present lines. It is not thus that nations are made. End of quote. And so I'd like to sort of leave with that note and that question about how our nation's made and what do we think of when we make a nation. But lest it be thought that this is too somber, I'd like to really end on a high note, literally. So with a crafted toy. So this is a bird. It's a bird in clay. It's a whistle. And this is what it sounds like when you put water in it. So to high notes. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Anisha, and also, of course, Shraddha and Shaguna for putting this so well, all of you. I hope we have a lot of audience who's listening in. I know there's been some technical glitch, but we have managed to get Aditi in. And with your permission, dear panel, I would like Aditi to make a small interjection. Aditi is also an industrial designer, and I think she just about may have been taught by Anisha and me. But we would like her to. She's also a toy designer formally, and she did desperately want to say something. So over to you, Aditi.
Thank you so much, Anubha ma'am. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It was lovely to Anisha ma'am again. I really remember, and she also referenced some of the classes that we had along with her. So it just reminded me the old times when we used to have your classes.
Good to see you.
I actually learned a lot of things not only looking towards design in terms of industrialization, but also in terms of context, in terms of craft, in terms of renewing new things rather than only looking for something, old things rather than only looking for something which is completely new. I really liked Ms. Shraddha's ideas in terms of rejuvenating the traditional toys which are there from the centuries and putting them into today's context. Unfortunately, I was not there when Ms. Shaguna was talking, so I missed out on that part. So sorry for that. I would just like to interject one small incident, not incidents, but one particular game which we used to play in our childhood, which was completely based on the context which we invented. I haven't heard from anyone about playing or about this particular game. So that game used to called Lo or Lakkad. So that is in English, it is like iron or wood. And because this was when we were very small, most of the houses, the doors and the windows and the gates, they used to be, made of either wood or iron or the combination of both. So we used to have this particular game in which the controller, the person whose turn is there, he would call out either wood or iron, and all the children, they have decided the point A and point B. So they have to go from point A to point B only by touching either wood or iron as by the dinner. So this was very exciting. And the moment you are out of touch from any of that material, you can get caught and you are out of the game. So now this particular game is not something which is coming from maybe generations, but this is a very contextual game where you are just creating a game rather than playing a game which is coming from the generations. You are actually improvising onto some other game like Unch Neech Ka. There is some called game Nadi or Pahad in Gujarati because I have grown up in Gujarat, so quite different from here. So there is some another game called Nadi or Pahad in which there is a learning of some surface which is above and below. So similarly, this game is completely based on the material where you are learning the aspects of tactile feel of the material. Along with that, it also is adding into your fine motor skill and gross motor skill also, and a lot of fun also, right? And that is completely contextual because everything is made either through either of this material. This was one particular game which I used to love, and we used to feel very proud that we have invented a game rather than we are playing a game. So yeah, I think what I would like to add. Another interesting, I'm not sure if I have time.
Very quickly, Aditi.
Okay. Another interesting object is the cowrie shells, which I really love because cowrie shells can actually be game itself. It can be the controller of the game, like the dice through which you can proceed with your game further. And it can also become the pawn itself. So a simple cowrie shell, which we can get in abundant because we have a long seashore, and through only that cowrie shell, it can become a game, and it can play a role of all these three different parts of any particular indoor game. So I think, yes, I completely agree on the part where it's all about creating the toys, creating the games, and also rejuvenating some of the traditional objects, traditional games, traditional toys that we already had. So on that note, thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Aditi, for that very interesting game. I of course could relate it to Unch Neech immediately, but I hadn't heard of Lo and Lakkad. And I think, yes, that's wonderful the way it kind of, rooted you in your context of a Gujarati town, which I presume, which is where it was. And the two materials that were primarily being used was loha and lakkad, and you could play it. So yes, Anisha, did you want to say something? I thought you
We've
were saying
also
something.
played a variation of this. I wanted to say that we've also played a variation of this, and the lower lakkad that you're talking about, and as well as the cowrie shells. Except that we used to have pebbles, because in the hills, you have gravel. And again, you pick up and you can do all sorts of things with it. Quite amazing things. Some of my aunts can toss about 10 of them, like a juggling trick. So yes, what you extract, I think, from your neighborhood, it also depends on how much you are, I think, inundated with. So I think children today, given an opportunity, would be able to do that, except that just, they don't have any time or any.
Yes.
Yeah, so that okay, so coming back to some of the things that all of you in a way raised, the takeaway for me somewhere becomes, so what is the difference here now, or what is the difference that we have to probably be mindful of, difference between consumption and enjoyment? So that's what you were saying, Anisha. Now, where is the time? And they have so much, other things that are coming their way. Where is the time to actually savor? Like Aditi savored that low lakkad game, and Shaguna gave us that very interesting sort of a narrative of the bloodhound and
Greyhounds.
Yeah, the greyhound. Sorry, not the bloodhound. I mean, reading too many thrillers. Yes, the greyhounds and the Christmas, and of course, Shraddha, with your very interesting, like the older people, especially playing games also when they have the time. So somewhere we've lost that enjoyment in this over and over need for consumption. And there I would like to get into this, because we are also talking about what has our nation become or identity become. It may be because, and this is a provocation which I would like all of you to address one by one, it may be that because as parents, us, Anisha and I at our age, or maybe some of the younger people like you, Shraddha, you may not be a parent yet, but your generation, we have grown up having been, grown up on Enid Blytons or whatever, and have sort of somewhere lost, perhaps did lose touch with our own context. So to our own children, and I'm just speaking for the larger public there, we always try to provide for them, the best educational thing and the best informative game, the best, the best we can in a way, and we do it out of all the well-meaningness of all parents. But in the process, what we've done is we've moved further away from a context. So this is more of a provocation. So where does this line between consumption and enjoyment blur? It blurs very clearly. And then is this not is this about toys or play, or is this about the whole system or the whole milieu of education, perhaps?
So may I go first?
Yes, I can see good time to go.
Well,
Yes.
I think the answer to all of that is really the method of manufacture. So when you talk about consumption and enjoyment, the reason you are flooded by consumer items is because you have embraced a system of production which just calls for more and more production to sort of feed itself. It's like this, it's like this huge sort of spider that's sort of almost eating up all its mates or whatever. And if you did not do that, then it's basically you wouldn't have so many things, right? And you would automatically have the time and you would have the space to look around you and create by yourself. And I think that's what craft does. And really the danger today, I think, is that craft is being made over. There's a makeover to try to make craft like an industrial mode of production. So everybody's saying, oh, but craft doesn't produce so many numbers. But why do you need so many numbers? I think that is a fundamental question. And that's also what I think Anand Kumaraswamy asked about 111 years ago, is this what we think is a pinnacle of civilization, to be sort of flooded with products? And evidently the answer is not. But finally, it depends, as you said, on what we perceive. What do we want to be for ourselves and therefore for the nation? So therefore, the children in my daughter's class, I don't know why they got those Barbies, whether it was advertising, which was again then fed by this need for the market to sell more, or it was the aspirations of their parents, who again look, sort of look west, young man, go west, young man, look west, young woman. So it's that. So I think it's essentially, it's shifting your mode of production, which means shifting your ideals in life, really.
True. Agreed. Yeah, Shraddha. Yes.
To go at it, like people have to really value what human resources do more than affordances that people have, which also try to put stratas into place. because I can afford this. 10 years ago, I couldn't afford something, but now I have the capacity to buy it for my children or for my nephew. That is a status that people kind of hold in societies. But what is missing is creating common spaces, inclusive spaces, and safe spaces which can foster the kind of freedom we enjoyed as kids. Our parents were never looking out for us every 30 minutes or every 15 minutes. Kahan gaye? So having those safe spaces within communities, which can bring children from diverse backgrounds, the more and more India is growing, the more and more people are traveling from north to south and east to west and everywhere. So in any city that you go today, you will have such diversity of people with such knowledge and grandparents and parents and other people that it can be a really good place for people to learn from each other. But for that, we probably will have to also stress on not more more consumerism, but common facilities and spaces or museums or kind of initiatives that people can take ownership of and contribute towards, whether with their time or with their knowledge or with common resources that can be used by all. I'm sure like post pandemic, there would come a time where these things would be possible and people would understand the value of human interaction more than anything else in today's time. I think this is one thing my takeaway from 2020 is I can do with everything but people. People are the driving factors of how we learn and we grow and we emotionally stay connected with what we call cultural identity. So when you go abroad, like what you miss is like just going to neighborhood auntie and saying hello, or complimenting somebody on the color of kurta they are wearing today, taking your dog out for a walk. Like there's so many other things, and that is how children would learn. So I'm really hoping for that future with common resources that can be shared by a lot of people. Go ahead. Thank you so much for this.
So, Anubha, I'd just like to add to that, that, also today you have parents and both of them are working and you got kids staying at home. It could be that the grandparents have taken over the role of, looking after them, or they have a nanny or somebody looking after them. But basically, a lot of families have only one child. Some of them might have two. And people are very unsure of sending them out into the colony to, play. So they are very restricted and they have to go by, keep them safe, keep them occupied. So, hence you end up seeing whatever Doraemon and whatever's coming on the TV. Or then you go ahead and buy expensive items like PS4 and Xbox. And you'd see the limitation of that. Lots of games are one player game because you're only one person. You don't even have another sibling to play with. Or, you have maybe maximum 2-player games. So when at home, they're all by themselves, they're using all these gadgets of PS4 and Xbox, playing by themselves. But the moment they go into school, and that's why the schools are so important, there are 4 or 5 kids playing together. When these kids come back home and you check their bags, you will find, the old games that we used to play, which was like Chor Sipahi and Razavadi. Because, you need 4 people to play. And, if there's a 5th person who comes in, so you'll add up another, you have a queen. That okay, there's also a queen or there's another, somebody coming in. So they do improvise, provided what's the space and how many people there are. So there's also that limitation of the times we are living in.
I would add, sorry, Anubha, just to add a point before, competition, a healthy competition versus the kind of competitiveness that schools are adding these days, that you have to play to win sort of a thing. At Studio Clockwork is play to learn, do not play to win. Because most of the games kind of Majid Gya, children these days, I have observed over the last 1 decade, they do not know how to lose a game gracefully. While winning does give you a lot of kick and adrenaline rush, but children have forgotten how to lose a game. Like, it's something of concern to me. So while schools are fostering this culture of like playing games, children encouraging team play, cooperative games would be a way also to look into and look forward to, actually. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just step in here because also this theme of the design week is toys, and I have to somewhere sort of squarely bring it back. So although we're talking of very interesting things, I remember as we were talking about this panel earlier informally, I was talking about how do we also make it competitive. not just in terms of, you've answered that in a way, Anisha, that it doesn't have to be numbers. It could be selective production and all of that, but it also has to be affordable. Of course, when we see examples of our traditional play, we see that it is not very resource intensive, and therefore it makes it affordable. But what is happening now with all of this is that there is certain, when objects are coming into play, and these objects are sort of constructed or designed objects, if I may say, if we are sitting in a design week, so designed objects. So then there's a issue of exclusivity, or a non-inclusivity that steps in. While you were all speaking, and I'll probably end with this, and I'll ask you to give your closing remarks after that, because you have to close soon. Somewhere, do you think the birthday parties are to blame, with all the gifting and cross gifting and the return presents and all of that? Because that's also become very object oriented. But you get my point, that how do we also reach a large number of people? We did touch upon that, how education systems and schools and spaces and all of that comes into it, that children really don't need. Aditi gave us this brilliant example of children really don't need a lot of resources to come up with games and play. But if we have forgotten, even if it's just one generation, us, like let's say we take the blame upon us and say that we've forgotten, and children will come back to it. But how do we make it inclusive and make it reach out to a large number of people? So your closing comment, ladies, and then we'll probably have to call it a day. Yes.
Who wants to go first?
I can go first
Yeah,
with just my closing remark about, while as much as we are focusing towards building the industry so that the import kind of reduces and we start making more at home, an important part of this also would be to design systems where we also train the trainer, or we also provide these common resources across lakhs of government schools, lakhs of like private schools, where we make play an essential commodity, making play a commodity rather than making more products. There are a zillion things, but to be able to filter and curate good games is another art altogether. Just pounding your kids with these electronic toys or digital gadgets, I'm not saying all of that is bad. There has to be a marriage between analog and digital, but we need to carefully curate what we are exposing our kids to. There are lots of interesting digital apps. There are lots of good games out there, but curating good content and spending some resources on designing these systems which can be replicated across the country in small regions, big regions, for early years and for like teenagers would be a good way to look or invest into as well.
So if I may just capture that in a couple of words, Shraddha says that we need to train the trainers and kind of bring curated play, which plays on, which is frugal, which is not resource intensive, and which is accessible. Okay, thank you, Shraddha. Shaguna.
I'd like to say that, you need to, of course, market whatever it is. A Doraemon, a Bheem, because you see it, either on TV or wherever else you're seeing, but also the availability of it. So if you go to the nearby shop and you want to give a gift on a birthday, you'll just go to the nearest shop, or maybe two shops you'll go to, and whatever you will find, you'll have to just pick it up and give. So one is, of course, market it. Talk to the schools, talk to the teachers, talk to the parents. Like these Scholastic will do a book fair, every parents there that they're showcasing books. So why don't you showcase the kind of traditional toys that you have, or more innovative toys, Indian toys that you have, but also make them available, whether it's in the nearest shop or in schools. At least this government schools can start doing that. So yeah, marketing and availability.
Marketing and availability, Shaguna, that's a great point, because that's where we stumble. We all have very good points, but then we don't know how to kind of get this across. Anisha.
Well, to carry on from what they said, two things. One is resource, accessing of resource. So I think the reason that a lot of the crafts are not, they're not able to compete in a fair way is they don't have access to resources. So we discover that actually they need very little, but bamboo, clay, all that is not really made available to them. It's become very difficult. So the same kind of, I think, so basically what we're talking about is patronage. So we all need to be sort of responsible patrons, whether it's at a government level, in terms of sort of giving, if you give subsidies to large scale mechanized stations, and why not, for instance, in places like Bali, etc., craftspeople have access to wood, timber, whatever. That's one. And all of us, I think, can, with a little bit of effort, actually be patrons. So to just go back to the birthday sort of scenario. So in birthdays, we've turned it into an opportunity. And normally we would take children to the park and they play things like Kho-Kho or Langri Tang, and they love it. or we do treasure hunts at home with, little slips of paper and, things like an apple or an orange, and they're all very happy. And the gifts that we've been giving, the return gifts, have actually been translations of Bangla stories. So, you can, I think there are options with anything.
So there definitely are options, and I know, some of us and some more people are, of course, trying to do it. But the numbers, I'm just looking at.
So that's why I'm talking about patronage. Each of us has to be a patron. We can't leave it to somebody else.
Absolutely.
At the policy level, there has to be more support to the crafts, not at competing with industrialized products, but on their own strengths.
That's
Right.
quite an amazing amount of.
Taruna, I know you're running out of time. So just to bring it to a closure. So yes, so I think the notion that toys do make a notion, and fact that a nation, and the fact that we are kind of stumbling and perhaps not doing quite something right. I hope this panel goes out to the other members of the Design Week, because I know we've had a lot of conversations around toys. I hope they do look at it as almost as a national endeavor as well. So with those final remarks, back to you.
Thank you. A very engaging session at the in the evening, and I'll invite Anita Suri to quickly give a vote of thanks. Thank you all, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Anubha ma'am, Anisha, Shraddha, Shaguna, and Aditi for sharing your insights based on your experiences with toys and taking us on a journey of toys, games, and play spaces across the world. So toys are indeed a big part of our everyday life, be it home, work, family, festivals, etc. And indigenous toys have a place of their own in this tech age of gadgets, video games, and anime. Thank you for substantiating the role of toys as teaching and learning tools and driving the point home that toys do indeed make a nation. So with that, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a
Thank you,
pleasure.
everyone.